Up next, the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. After this message.
Evergreen's calling.
Most people don't realize that cannabis is serious business that requires serious technology solutions. Hi, I'm Terry from Sunstate Technology Group, where we are seriously proud to provide technology and security systems that help cannabis companies compete and succeed. From planning and expansion to hardware and daily IT support, I'm here to tell you that having the right technology is critical to security and smooth business operations. Partner with a technology team that understands the unique needs of this industry. For details, visit sunstatetech.com/cannabis. sunstatetech.com/cannabis.
And now, it's time for the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. Listen in as Snowden interviews cannabis industry pioneers, marijuana experts, policymakers, medical practitioners, patients, and other amazing individuals with compelling stories to share. It all happens right now. Here's the Cannabis Reporter, Snowden Bishop.
Evergreen is calling.
Hi, and welcome back to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. I'm Snowden Bishop, and I'm happy you could join us. I was surprised to learn that cannabis is the most frequently searched term on most common search engines. That, according to Newsbank, which is a major distributor of news and educational content serving institutional subscribers and libraries in the government, academic, research, and military sectors. That tells me that the demand for credible information about it is insatiable. Fortunately, there is no shortage of information about cannabis online. A simple Google search for the keyword cannabis yields more than 242 million results. It's daunting. But it hasn't always been that way. I remember when we first registered the domain for the Cannabis Reporter back in 2012, there were maybe a dozen websites catering to cannabis advocates, only a handful of credible websites where patients could learn about medical marijuana. Just 2 years earlier, in 2010, when I wrote my first article about hemp, it was nearly impossible to find anything about it online with the exception of a few advocacy websites, some historical data, and a lot of anti-marijuana propaganda conflating it with cannabis. Information available online was largely conjecture, with both sides of the marijuana debate making a case to support their position with very little in terms of verifiable data to back their claims. Times have changed. Just in the last decade, we've seen scientific research grow exponentially. State regulation has provided real-time data about drug use and related crime that debunk drug war myths. Hundreds of new cannabis brands are launching to meet the overwhelming demand in states where it's legal, and more states are legalizing it for medical or adult use. With a vast majority of Americans now favoring some form of legalization, and a warming attitude about ending prohibition brewing in Congress, it's only a matter of time before cannabis is legalized countrywide. It's the Wild West, and the anticipation is truly palpable. It's no wonder there are so many media outlets catering to advocates. But with so much information now available to consumers, sorting through it to determine what's credible and what's not is still a daunting task. With all of the excitement about the emerging industry, there's bound to be a lot of hyperbole and unverified claims being made by well-intentioned enthusiasts. As interest in cannabis grows among mainstream audiences, patients are beginning to rely more and more on information they find online in order to make critical decisions about treatment options. The need for factually sober information is becoming more and more critical. That's the topic of today's show, and we have a media maverick here to talk about it. His name is Michael Klein. He hails from the world of televised entertainment and has held a variety of senior-level positions in original programming at network outlets like Viacom's MTV, the Travel Channel, and Condé Nast. Today, he's at the helm of Cannabis MD, a relatively new media outlet that focuses on objective content, providing factual information and resources for patients and adult users. He recently launched a trailblazing marketing campaign to promote his new media outlet in mainstream venues, including Times Square, where, for the first time in New York City's history, throngs of people got to see the word cannabis broadcasting on a giant video billboard ad last month. Michael, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You're certainly welcome. So I'm really intrigued. I saw your release on the billboard in Times Square, which I think is fabulous. Tell me a little bit about Cannabis MD and what you're doing. And then I do want to hear about why you put a billboard in Times Square.
Of course. Cannabis MD is the global authority for potential medical benefits of medical cannabis and CBD, and doing it from a non-advocacy point of view. And that's what makes us really unique in this marketplace. We don't have a bias towards use. What we are doing is presenting all of the positive information from research to first-person accounts and the negative research and first-person accounts, with the goal to educate and empower consumers to make choices that are right for their lifestyle.
So basically, do you have medical doctors that are on staff with you that handle inquiries, or is it mainly just an online resource?
So we do have a medical advisory board that is made up of doctors from all different disciplines, that, from research to actually practices where they incorporate medical cannabis or CBD in their treatment. The content is all original, but it's driven not by necessarily incoming questions per se, but what we've been doing is we identify audiences around certain need states. So it could be anxiety, it could be sleep, it could be pain management, and create original content within those arenas that really engages that audience.
See, I love that you're doing this because there are more resources now than, say, when I started doing this that are available to consumers online. But when it comes to the focus on the medical, there's still just such an absence of credible information that's out there. And so kudos to you. This is a really good service that you're providing, I think, for the consumer. But, you have a journey too. And I want to hear about that. Like, what got you going into cannabis to begin with?
Well, it's exactly that reason, to be perfectly honest. Years ago, my father, who was suffering from a number of different ailments, called and he said, I'm thinking of trying medical marijuana, as he called it, for my pain. He lived in British Columbia, Canada. And I said, I think that's a great idea. So, in Canada, cannabis has been legal for medical use for quite some time. Of course, it is now available for adult consumption, late last year. But at that time, he could go to his doctor and get a prescription, which he did. And then what? He was left to going to a dispensary where, the young Jason, making up the name, behind the counter is prescribing or giving my father a vape for morning and a vape for night. And I'm sure Jason's a nice kid, but why is he guiding my 78-year-old father through this journey? So for me, as a caregiver from a distance, going online, it's like TripAdvisor. You don't know if this content is verified, if it has authority, if it's truthful. It's so confusing. And that was a few years ago. And so if you think about what's happened even in the last 12 months with the focus on medical cannabis, on legalization, on CBD entering our lives from Martha Stewart to pet food, etc., it's driving that much more consumer awareness, consumer curiosity, and consumer confusion of finding a way. How can we cut through the clutter? How can we help consumers navigate this path? And that really was the motivation for starting the company.
You raised a really interesting point. I did a show on this a long time ago, that we're relying on bud tenders to provide medical advice because the medical professionals really just aren't there yet. And That's quite frustrating for a patient, I would think. I mean, I'll never forget my first experience going into a dispensary and just asking questions of the people behind the counter. And there were a couple of people who really did know what some of the uses of different cannabinoids would be. But there were a couple of instances where I walked into dispensary and was told what was going to give me the best high. And I didn't want to know that. I wanted to know what was going to be the best for whatever was going on. And just asking those questions from a journalistic point of view, but as a patient, going in and asking the questions as if I were, really seeking out that advice. And it's really interesting because I just felt like the patient was going to be left hanging and had to go and do their own research online and find some of the medical providers that'll get on the phone with you and talk to you about what these different things do. And it's really the producers, the early adopters of this industry who have been hands-on trying to help patients navigate the complexities of the cannabis plant. So it's an interesting problem. So, and I'm looking forward to a day when we've got education from the doctor's point of view. The medical schools need to really start delving into the endocannabinoid system. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what's your earlier point that you're right that we're surrendering, our healthcare consultation and even prescription to individuals that may not be fully equipped to do that for us. In the case of a bud tender, when looking across the digital landscape, what we found prior to launching Cannabis MD was that any number of platforms have emerged, but they were all speaking to an adult consumption market. Nobody was speaking to that cannabis curious consumer who wanted to learn more, but they didn't see themselves going into a dispensary for that very reason of not being able to trust the information they were getting, or looking at other platforms that are speaking to the adult consumption market. But it may be, the medical advice may be, beside somebody blowing smoke or rolling something or stigmatizing language. So again, it causes confusion for that consumer, and that's what we're building with Cannabis. Certainly on the institutions around the world that are doing research are limited, and you have to say even in the U.S., the UCLA Cannabis Research Institute is certainly ahead of the game. I saw that. I believe it's Harvard just partnered with someone to do some initial research. So it's going to start. I think you'll see more and more of that. You're still dealing with a Schedule I drug, and that's a real problem for these institutions on a number of reasons. I mean, not only from a legal perspective, but there's a stigma there. And if they make that move into research, are they at risk of having a negative impact on their funding source? Who knows? There can be any variety of reasons. I think, as you see legalization from a medical perspective rolling through the country, I mean, the midterm election with Utah going legal for medical cannabis and nobody talked about it. Utah, that's amazing. So there is a significant shift occurring, and I think you're going to see that continue.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I was really pleasantly surprised to see that so many states are starting to jump on board from the medical side. And also we're getting a lot of support now in Congress, which I think will be, very interesting actually. And I mean, it's really come a long way. You've come from the world of television and entertainment as well. I spent a lot of time in the music industry, and cannabis was one of those closeted activities that seem to be pretty prevalent among people in the music industry, especially not so much in television. And I come from that world as well, but in the music industry, it was almost as if it were a tool for creativity. So there was a vast acceptance in that world, as if it were just a part of life, just like somebody having a beer after work. So when you keep that in mind, in that context, to see the transition of what's happened culturally from that world, tell me a little bit about your experiences working in the world of television and music.
Sure. Well, and prior to coming on board with Cannabis MD as CEO, I was running original programming and content at MTV, in the heart of music television, as it were. And and prior to that, many years, running originals at TLC, at Travel Channel.